The stars had always been kind to humanity. For 40 years, Earth had walked among the giants of the galaxy with soft steps and open hands. They signed every treaty. They followed every rule. They smiled at species who looked down on them and called it diplomacy. Admiral Jinho Park had believed in that peace. He had spent 30 years in service, and in all that time, he had fired his weapons only twice. He was proud of this. He told young officers that patience was stronger than any gun. He believed it with his whole heart. On the morning of the massacre, Jinho was drinking tea in his quarters aboard the S Horizon. His fleet floated near the border of human space, running standard patrols. It was quiet. It was peaceful. It was the last peaceful morning of his life. The Veleth Empire had requested a cultural exchange with the human colony on Kepler 4 to be. The colony was home to 2.3 million people. Farmers, teachers, doctors, children. They had built their homes on a green world far from Earth. They had made it beautiful. The Veleth arrived with 15 warships. The colonists welcomed them with music and food. They had nothing to fear. The Veleth were part of the Galactic Accord, and the Accord meant peace. The first shots came without warning. Veleth warships turned their weapons on the cities below. Plasma fire rained from the sky like burning rain. Buildings melted. Streets turned to rivers of glass. People ran, but there was nowhere to run. The Veleth had positioned their ships to block every escape route. Shuttles trying to flee were shot down before they could reach orbit. It took 6 hours to kill 2.3 million people. The Veleth recorded everything. They broadcast the massacre across the galaxy so that every species could see. This was their message. Humans were weak. Humans were prey. Humans could be killed without consequence. Admiral Jinho received the distress signal 3 hours into the massacre. His fleet was 2 days away at maximum speed. He ordered his ships to push their engines beyond safe limits. Some of his crew wept. Some prayed. Jinho stood on the bridge and watched the clock count down the hours. They arrived too late. Jinho looked out at what remained of Kepler 4 to be. The green world was now brown and black. Smoke rose from every continent. Debris floated in orbit. Bodies drifted among the wreckage of civilian ships. He saw the body of a child pressed against a shuttle window. Her eyes were still open. Jinho did not speak. He could not speak. He simply stood there as his crew worked in silence, collecting the dead and recording evidence of what had happened. In 30 years of service, he had never felt hatred. Now it burned in his chest like a cold fire. On Earth, Dr. Unabek watched the broadcast from her research station in Sol orbit. She was a scientist who studied alien biology. She had always believed that understanding between species was possible. She had written papers about cooperation and mutual respect. Her younger brother Junho had moved to Kepler 4 to be. 3 years ago, he was a teacher. He sent her messages every week, telling her about his students and the beautiful sunsets on his new world. Yuna watched the cities burn. She watched the schools collapse. She watched until the broadcast ended. Then she fell to her knees and screamed until her voice broke. Across Earth, the same scene played out millions of times. Everyone knew someone on Kepler 4 to be. Everyone had lost someone. The Galactic Court held an emergency meeting. 12 species gathered to discuss the massacre. They expressed deep concern. They offered their sympathies. They urged all parties toward peaceful dialogue. Then they did nothing. The Veleth Empire faced no sanctions, no punishment, no consequences. The Accord released a statement calling the massacre regrettable and encouraging humanity to seek diplomatic solutions. Prime Minister Sora Han read the statement in her office. She was known as a calm woman, a patient woman, a woman who believed in peace above all things. She had spent her career building bridges with alien species. She put down the statement and looked out her window at the earth below. Somewhere down there, parents were telling their children that they would never see their relatives again. Somewhere down there, people were crying for justice that would never come. Sora had believed in the Accord. She had trusted the galaxy to protect her people. That trust was now ash. Just like the cities of Kepler-44b, General Taeyeon-roo entered her office without knocking. He was the head of Earth's military, and he had warned against trusting the Accord for 20 years. No one had listened. Now everyone would. He placed a folder on her desk. It was marked with a single word. Prometheus Sor looked at the folder. She knew what it contained. Weapons humanity had been forbidden to develop. Technology they had hidden from the galaxy for decades. Plans that would turn Earth from a peaceful member of the galactic community into something else entirely. She thought of the child's face pressed against the shuttle window. She thought of 2.3 million names that would never be spoken again. She thought of her own daughter, sleeping safely in their home, and how easily that safety could be taken away. Sor opened the folder in orbit. Admiral Ginho Park gave the order to bring the bodies home. Every single one. It would take months. He did not care. These were his people, and they would not be left floating in the dark as his crew worked. Ginho received a message from Earth. It was from the Prime Minister herself. It contained only 3 words: prepare for war. Ginho read the message twice. Then he walked to the bridge of his ship and looked out at the burned world below. For 30 years he had believed in peace. That belief had died with 2.3 million of his people. He called his officers together. Their faces were tired and stained with tears. They looked at him with eyes that begged for guidance, for hope, for something to hold on to. Ginho gave them something else. He gave them purpose. He said they would remember every name. They would carry every death. And when the time came, it would make the galaxy understand what it meant to hurt humanity. The stars had been kind for 40 years. They would not be kind again. 1 week after the massacre, Earth was silent. The streets were empty. The factories were closed. Every screen on the planet showed the same thing: a list of names, scrolling endlessly. 2.3 million names? It would take 11 days for the list to complete. People stood in their homes and watched the names go by. They did not speak. They did not eat. They simply watched and remembered. Then the silence ended, and what replaced it was rage. Hannah Cho was a journalist. She had spent her career covering peaceful stories, scientific discoveries, cultural celebrations, the small joys of human life among the stars. Her parents had retired to Kepler-44 to be 2 years ago. They said the sunsets there were beautiful. Hannah stood in front of her camera and spoke to the world. Her voice was steady, but her hand shook. She said that her parents were dead. She said that justice would not come from the Galactic Accord. She said that humanity had been kind for 40 years, and kindness had been repaid with fire. Her broadcast was watched by 8 billion people. When she finished speaking, the rage that had been building in silence finally found its voice. Protests filled every city on Earth, not protests for peace. Protests for action, for justice, for blood. Signs carried the names of the dead. Voices chanted for war. The world had been patient for 40 years. The world was done being patient. Prime Minister Sorohan watched the protests from her office. She had not slept in days. The folder marked Prometheus sat open on her desk, filled with reports and blueprints and terrible possibilities. General Taeyeon-roo stood beside her. He had prepared for this moment his entire career. While others believed in peace, he had built secret facilities and trained hidden armies. He had been called paranoid. He had been called a warmonger. Now he was called necessary. Sora asked him if humanity could win a war against the Valith Empire. Taeyeon said that winning was not the question. Survival was the question. And survival required becoming something the galaxy had never seen. Sora closed her eyes. When she opened them, the woman who believed in peace was gone. In her place was something harder, something colder, something that would do whatever was necessary. She walked to the United Earth Assembly. Every leader of every nation waited for her. The gallery was filled with citizens who had traveled from across the world to hear her speak. Cameras broadcast her image to every human settlement in the galaxy. Soared at the podium and looked at her people. She saw grief. She saw anger. She saw a hunger for something she was about to give them. She spoke of 40 years. 40 years of following rules made by others. 40 years of accepting insults with smiles. 40 years of dismantling weapons because the Accord said humans were too dangerous to be armed. 40 years of trust. She spoke of Kepler 4, for 2b, of the children who had been taught to believe the galaxy was safe, of the parents who had sent their families to a green world, thinking they would be protected, of 2.3 million souls who died believing that civilization meant something. Then her voice changed. It became quiet. It became cold. It became something that made even the generals in the room feel fear. She said that humanity was done. Done following rules that only they obeyed. Done trusting species who watched them burn. Done being civilized in a galaxy that rewarded only strength. Earth formally withdrew from the Galactic Accord. Every treaty was canceled. Every agreement was void. Humanity would stand alone. Humanity would protect its own to the Valeth Empire. And any species who thought humans were prey, she had only this to say: "We are done being civilized." The assembly erupted. Not in argument, but in agreement. Every nation voted as one. There was no opposition. There was no debate. For the first time in human history, Earth spoke with a single voice. Ambassador Jihoshin was given the task of delivering the message to the Galactic Accord in person. He had served as Earth's representative for 15 years. He had shaken hands with aliens who now celebrated the deaths of his people. He had smiled at species who called humans primitive behind closed doors. Giho walked into the Accord chambers for the last time. 12 species watched him approach. Some looked curious. Some looked amused. The Veleth delegation sat in the front row, their sharp teeth visible in what might have been smiles. Jiho read the declaration. His voice did not shake. When he finished, he placed the document on the central table and turned to leave. A Veleth diplomat called out to him. The alien said that humans were paper predators. Loud but harmless. The galaxy had nothing to fear from a species that could not even protect its own colonies. Jiho stopped walking. He turned slowly. The chamber fell silent. He looked at the Veleth diplomat and spoke softly. He said that the Veleth had made a mistake that could not be undone. He said they should pray to whatever gods they believed in, because humanity's gods would not be merciful. Then he walked out of the chamber. He never looked back. On Earth, General Taeyun activated Project Prometheus. Facilities that had been hidden for decades opened their doors. Scientists who had worked in secret finally revealed their creations. Weapons that the Accord had forbidden. Technologies that were supposed to be impossible. Humanity had been preparing for this moment without knowing it. They had smiled and signed treaties while building something terrible in the shadows. Not because they wanted war, but because some part of them had always known that peace was borrowed, not given. The factories began to change. Assembly lines that had produced cars now produced warships. Universities became research centers for weapons development. Young people who had planned to be artists and teachers lined up to join the military. Hannah Cho continued her broadcasts. She showed the world what humanity was becoming. She showed the new ships being built. She showed the soldiers training with weapons that had never existed before. She showed a species transforming itself from prey into predator at night. She looked at photos of her parents and wondered if they would recognize what their daughter had become. What all of humanity had become. Admiral Jinho Park stood on the bridge of his ship as the last bodies from Kepler 442b were brought home. He had kept his promise. Every single person had been recovered. Every single person would be buried on Earth. As the transport ships departed for home, Jinho composed a message. He addressed it to the Veleth High Command. It was short. He told them that humanity remembered every name, every face, every child who had died in the fire. He told them that humanity was coming, and when they arrived, the Veleth would learn what humans were capable of. The message was sent. Across the galaxy, species who had ignored humanity for decades suddenly found themselves paying attention. Something had changed. Something had awakened, and the galaxy would never be the same. 6 months passed. The galaxy waited for humanity to collapse. Every species knew the pattern. Small civilizations that left the galactic accord fell into chaos. Their economies failed. Their governments crumbled. They came crawling back within a year, begging for forgiveness. The Velith High Command was patient. They had broken many species before. Humans would be no different. They were soft. They were emotional. They would tear themselves apart with grief and anger. And then the Velith would finish what they had started. But humanity did not collapse. Humanity transformed. Lieutenant Yoonji Lim had been a cargo pilot before the massacre. She flew supply ships between Earth and the outer colonies. It was boring work, safe work. She had never fired a weapon in her life. Now she sat in the cockpit of something that had no name yet. It was small and black and shaped like a knife. It moved faster than anything in the galaxy. Its weapons could cut through battleship armor like paper. Engineers called it a Striker-class warship. Pilots called it a death whisper. Yoonji ran her hands over the controls. 6 months ago, she had been delivering food packages. Now she was learning to kill. The change should have frightened her. Instead, it felt right. It felt necessary. Her squadron was made up of volunteers. Teachers, farmers, artists, people who had never thought about war until war came for them. They trained 16 hours a day. They pushed their bodies and minds beyond all limits. When one of them wanted to quit, they looked at the photos of Kepler 440b that covered the walls of their barracks. No one quit. EUNG. Named her squadron the 2.3 million. Every pilot carried a list of names from the massacre. They memorized them. They whispered them before every training mission. The dead were always with them. On Earth, Dr. Hyun Choi stood in front of the United Military Command and presented the weapons of Project Prometheus. He was a thin man with tired eyes. He had spent 20 years building things that were never supposed to be used. Now they would be used, and he was not sure how to feel about it. He showed them antimatter warheads. Small enough to fit in a fighter, but powerful enough to crack a moon. He showed them nanite swarms that could eat through enemy ships from the inside. He showed them gravity pulse generators that could crush a fleet into a ball of twisted metal. The generals watched in silence. They had known that secret programs existed, but they had not known the scale. Humanity had been preparing for extinction without realizing it. General, Taeyeon asked, how long until the weapons were ready for combat? Dr. Haeon said they were already ready. They had been ready for years. They had just been waiting for permission. Permission was given. Sergeant Dong Yuk-yoon trained the ground forces. He was a large man with scars on his face from battles most people had forgotten. He had fought pirates on the outer colonies. He had protected mining stations from raiders. He knew what it meant to fight when no one was coming to save you. His soldiers were called Reapers. They wore black armor that made them invisible to sensors. They carried weapons that could punch through walls. They trained in environments that would kill normal humans. Extreme heat. Extreme cold. No gravity. Dong Hyuk pushed them until they broke. Then he put them back together and pushed them again. He told them that the Velith were stronger and faster than humans. The only way to beat them was to be harder, more ruthless, more willing to die. His soldiers listened. They became something that did not exist before. Human weapons. The Velith sent scout ships to probe human space. They expected to find chaos. Refugees fleeing. Defenses crumbling. Easy targets. They found something else. The first scout group encountered a minefield that had not existed 6 months ago. The mines were smart. They waited until the scouts were deep inside the field before activating. 3 ships were destroyed in seconds. The 4th tried to flee and ran into a second minefield. The second scout group found a human patrol. 5 small ships against 1 Velith cruiser. The Velith captain laughed and ordered his weapons to fire. The human ships moved like nothing the Velith had ever seen. They dodged plasma fire with impossible speed. They slipped through gaps in the cruiser's defenses. They attached something to the hull and then flew away. The Velith captain had 3 seconds to wonder what had happened before. His ship was eaten from the inside by machines too. Small to see, the 3rd scout group simply vanished. No distress signal. No debris, nothing. They entered human space and never came out. The Velith High Command reviewed the reports. They dismissed them as accidents, malfunctions, bad luck. Humans were weak. Everyone knew this. A few lost scouts meant nothing. They were wrong. Admiral Jinho Park watched the scout encounters from his command ship. His fleet had grown. New ships arrived every week, fresh from the factories of Earth. Crews trained around the clock. The machine of war was spinning faster every day. Ginho sent a message to the Velith homeworld. It was simple. He told them that humanity remembered. He told them that humanity was coming. He did not say when. He did not say how. He let them wonder. The message was meant to create fear. For the first time, Velith citizens began to ask questions. Why had they attacked the humans? What if the humans fought back? What if the humans won? The Velith government silenced these questions quickly. But the fear remained. It grew in the dark places where governments could not reach. Dr. Unibeek worked in a different kind of laboratory now. She no longer studied alien biology for understanding. She studied it for weakness. Every species had vulnerabilities, pressure points, things that could hurt them. She found many things that could hurt the Velith. Yuna worked with cold focus. She did not cry anymore. She had no tears left. She had only purpose. Her brother had died believing in peace. She would not make the same mistake. Across human space, the same transformation happened. Scientists became weapons designers. Doctors became combat medics. Artists became propaganda makers. Every skill was turned toward a single goal. The galaxy had made a mistake. They had looked at humanity and seen sheep, soft creatures that followed rules and avoided conflict. They had not looked closely enough. Sheep were what humans pretended to be. Wolves were what humans actually were. Lieutenant Yunji completed her training. Her squadron was declared combat ready. She sat in her striker and looked at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Velith were waiting. They thought they were safe. They thought they had won. They were about to learn otherwise. Admiral Jinho gave the order. The fleet began to move. Not toward the Velith border. Not yet. They moved to hidden positions throughout the galaxy, waiting, preparing, building the trap that would spring when the time was right. The awakening was complete. Humanity had become something new, something the galaxy had never seen before. And now it was time for the reckoning. 1 year after the massacre, humanity struck. The Velith expected a frontal assault. They had positioned their best fleets at the border, ready to crush the weak humans who dared to challenge them. Their admirals were confident. Their soldiers were eager. They would teach humanity its final lesson. But the attack did not come from the border. Nari Song was an intelligence officer. She had spent the past year living in the shadows, cracking codes and mapping enemy territory. She knew every Velith supply route, every fuel depot, every communication relay. Every weakness, she gave Admiral Jinho Park 17 targets. 17 places where the Velith were vulnerable. 17 keys that would unlock their destruction. Jinho looked at the targets and smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had waited a long time for this moment. At midnight, Earth time, human fleets appeared simultaneously at all 17 locations. They came out of hiding like ghosts. No warning. No announcement. Just silent ships emerging from the darkness. The Velith fuel depot at Station Corvin was the largest in their empire. It supplied half their military fleet. It was guarded by 50 warships and 10,000 soldiers. The human fleet arrived with 100 ships and weapons that should not exist. Captain Minho Kong commanded the ESS Vengeance. It was a Dreadnought-class warship, the largest ever built by human hands. Its hull was black. Its weapons glowed with contained fire. It moved through space like a predator stalking prey. Minho had been a young officer on the ESS. Horizon, the day of the massacre, he had helped collect the bodies of children from the wreckage. He had carried them to the transport ships and tried not to look at their faces, Now he gave the order to fire. The Velith ships were not prepared. They expected enemies who followed rules, enemies who announced themselves, enemies who gave warnings and demanded surrender. Humans gave no warnings. Humans demanded nothing. Antimatter warheads tore through Velith formations. Ships that had taken years to build were destroyed in seconds. Crews that had trained for decades died without understanding what had hit them. The fuel depot exploded. A chain reaction spread through the storage tanks, each explosion feeding the next. The light was visible from 3 star systems away, at the Velith shipyards of Draven Prime. Lieutenant Yunji Lim led her squadron into battle. 12 Striker-class ships against 200 enemy fighters. The odds were impossible. Yunji smiled. Impossible was where humans did their best work. Her ships moved in patterns the Velith could not predict. They used the shipyard's own structures as cover, weaving between half-built warships and fuel lines. Velith fighters tried to follow. They crashed into walls. They shot each other in the confusion. They died screaming. Yunji lost for pilots. She mourned them. Then she led the survivors deeper into the shipyard and placed charges on every critical system. When they flew away, the shipyard collapsed behind them. 2 years of Velith construction work vanished in fire at Communication Relay 7. Narisong led a small team aboard the station. They wore Reaper armor. They moved like shadows. The Velith guards never saw them coming. Nari found the central computer and downloaded everything. Years of Velith military secrets, fleet positions, invasion plans, political communications. All of it now belonged to humanity. Then she planted a virus. It would spread through every connected system. It would corrupt data. It would delete records. It would make the Velith blind. She walked out of the station as it died around her. Her team lost no one. The war lasted 6 months. It was not a war of conquest. Humanity did not want Velith territory. They wanted Velith destruction. They wanted to break the machine that had killed their children. Admiral Jinho led the main fleet in a campaign that would be studied for centuries. He never attacked where the enemy was strong. He attacked where they were weak. He cut supply lines until Velith ships ran out of fuel. He destroyed communication relays until Velith commanders could not talk to each other. He turned their empire into islands of confusion and fear. The Velith tried to counterattack. They sent their remaining fleets toward Earth, hoping to end the war with a single devastating blow. They found humanity waiting for them. The Battle of Seoul lasted 3 days. 400 Velith warships against everything humanity had built in the past year. It was supposed to be the end of human civilization. It was the end of the Velith military captain. Minho Kong led the ESS Vengeance into the heart of the enemy formation. His ship was damaged. His crew was exhausted. His weapons were running low. He did not care. The Velith flagship was the largest ship in their fleet. It was commanded by Admiral Vorkon. The officer who had ordered the massacre of Kepler 4 for to be Minho had studied his face. He had memorized every detail. He had promised himself that Vorkon would die. The Vengeance broke through the enemy lines. It took hit after hit. Fires burned on every deck. Crew members died at their stations. But the ship kept moving. It kept fighting. Minho aimed his ship at the flagship's main hangar. At the last moment, he ordered all non-essential crew to the escape pods. Then he pushed the engines to maximum. The Vengeance crashed into the Velith flagship. The impact was tremendous. Both ships shattered. Explosions ripped through the wreckage. Admiral Vorkon died in his command chair. Too surprised to even scream, rescue teams found Minho 3 hours later. He was floating in a pocket of air, barely alive. His body was broken. His ship was gone, but he was smiling. The Battle of Seoul ended with the complete destruction of the Velith attack fleet. Not a single enemy ship escaped. The wreckage would orbit Earth's sun for centuries, a reminder of what happened to those who threatened humanity. The Galactic Accord called for a ceasefire. They sent diplomats with messages of peace. They promised to mediate. They offered to help find a solution that worked for everyone. Earth's response was silence. Lieutenant Yunji. Lim flew her final combat mission 3 weeks after the Battle of Seoul. Her target was a Velith military base on a moon called Sereth. It was the last significant enemy force in the region. Her squadron had 8 ships left. She had lost friends. She had lost Wingman. She had lost pieces of herself that would never come back. She did not regret any of it. The attack was quick and brutal. Human ships swept over the base like a storm. Buildings exploded. Defenses crumbled. Soldiers, who had once thought themselves invincible, ran in terror. When it was over, Youngji flew low over the destruction. She opened a channel and broadcast a single message to any Velith who could hear. She said the names of the dead. All 2.3 million of them. It took hours. She read every name while circling the burning base, making sure the enemy heard every syllable. When she finished, she flew home. The war for her was over, but for the Velith, the reckoning was just beginning. 3 years after the declaration, the war was over. The Velith Empire surrendered on a cold morning in their capital city. Their leaders stood in chains before Admiral Jinho Park, their heads bowed, their pride shattered. Behind them, the sky was filled with human warships, thousands of them. More than enough to end their civilization forever, the Velith people watched from their homes. They expected death. Their species had shown no mercy to Kepler-44b. They assumed humans would show no mercy in return. Parents held their children and waited for the fire to fall. But the fire did not fall. Admiral Ginho stepped forward and read the terms of surrender. His voice was calm and clear. Every word was broadcast across the planet and beyond. The Velith military would be completely dismantled. Every warship would be destroyed. Every weapon would be melted down. Every soldier would return home and never carry arms again. The Velith government would hand over every officer who had participated in the massacre. Every commander who gave orders, every pilot who fired weapons, every official who approved the attack. They would face trial before a human court. Justice would be served. The Velith people would pay reparations. Not money. Money was meaningless. They would send workers to rebuild what they had destroyed. For 50 years, Velith engineers would work to make Kepler-44b green again. But there would be no genocide. No revenge killings. No extinction. An elderly Velith stepped forward from the crowd. His scales were gray with age. His eyes were filled with confusion. He asked why. After everything his people had done, why would humans show mercy? Ginho looked at the old alien for a long moment. Then he answered. He said that humans could have destroyed the Velith homeworld. They had the weapons. They had the power. They had every reason. But destruction was what the Velith would have done. Humanity was not the Velith. He said that humans had been civilized once. They could be civilized again. But the galaxy should never forget what they became when they had to. The next species that touched human children would not receive mercy. They would receive extinction. The old Velith bowed his head. He understood. The trials began 1 month later. 47 Velith officers were found guilty of crimes against humanity. They were executed quickly and without ceremony. Their names were erased from Velith history. They became nothing. Admiral Vorkan, who had died in the Battle of Seoul, was tried in absence. His family was not punished. His children were allowed to live normal lives. Humans did not believe in blood guilt. Only those who committed crimes would pay for them. Prime Minister Sorahan addressed the galaxy from the rebuilt city of New Seoul. Her hair had turned gray during the war. Her face showed lines that had not been there before. She looked like someone who had carried the weight of worlds. She spoke of what humanity had learned. They had learned that peace was not given. It was built. It was defended. It was earned through strength as much as kindness. She spoke of what humanity would become. Protectors, guardians, a species that built and healed and explored. But also a species that would never again let its children burn. She invited the Galactic Accord to work with humanity on new terms. Not as masters and servants. Not as superiors and inferiors. As equals who understood that rules meant nothing without enforcement, the Accord accepted. They had no choice. The species that had laughed at humans now needed them. Dr. Unibeek traveled to Kepler-4 for 2b, before the dedication ceremony. The planet was still scarred. It would take decades for the damage to heal fully. But the work had begun. Where cities had burned, gardens now grew. Where schools had collapsed, new schools were being built. Where millions had died, a memorial stretched across an entire continent. Obsidian walls carved with names, 2.3 million names. Every single one. Una found her brother's name on the wall. She touched the carved letters with trembling fingers. She had not cried in years. Now the tears came, and she let them fall. A Velith worker approached her. He was young, barely an adult by his species standards. He had been assigned to the memorial maintenance team. His job was to keep the names clean and visible forever. He asked if the name she was touching belonged to someone she knew. Una said it was her brother. He had been a teacher. He had loved this world. The Velith worker bowed his head. He said he was sorry. He said his people had done a terrible thing. He said he would spend his life trying to make it right. Una looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. She did not forgive him. She could not forgive him. But she accepted that he was trying. That was enough. For now, Hannah Cho completed her documentary on the war. It was 12 hours long. It showed everything. The massacre. The declaration. The transformation. The battles. The surrender. The trials. It ended with footage of children playing on New Kepler Station. They ran through corridors and laughed at jokes only children understood. They had been born after the war. They knew nothing of burning cities and floating bodies, but they knew they were safe. They knew that the largest defense fleet in the galaxy watched over them. They knew that no species would ever touch them again. Hannah showed the documentary to Admiral Jinho before its release. He watched in silence. When it ended, he asked if she had included everything. Hannah said she had included the truth. All of it. The good and the bad. The mercy and the killing. The hope and the rage. Jinho nodded. He said that was what the galaxy needed to see. Not propaganda. Not lies. The truth of what humanity was and what humanity could become. The documentary was broadcast across the galaxy. Every species watched it. Every academy made it required study. Every child learned the story of Kepler-4 for 2b. They learned that humans preferred peace, that humans built hospitals and schools and gardens, that humans reached out with open hands to species in need. They also learned that humans had burned the Velith Empire to the ground when their children died. They learned that human ships were the fastest and most deadly in the galaxy. They learned that human soldiers fought without surrender. Captain Minho Kong recovered from his injuries. It took 2 years. His body was more machine than flesh now. But he was alive. He was promoted to admiral. He was given command of the largest fleet in human history. He spent his days training young officers. He told them stories of the war. He told them about the friends he had lost. He told them about the price of being unprepared, and he told them about mercy. About how humanity had won not just through strength, but through choice. They had chosen not to become the monsters they had fought. That choice mattered more than any victory. 50 years later, the galaxy knew a simple truth. Humanity was kind. Humanity was generous. Humanity helped those in need, regardless of species. And humanity was never to be threatened again. Above the entrance to the Galactic Council chambers, words were carved in stone. They were in every language, of every species. They would remain there forever. Reminder of what had happened and what would happen if the lesson was forgotten. The words were simple. They said, "Do not mistake our kindness for weakness. We chose to be civilized. We can choose differently." The galaxy remembered. The galaxy always would, and in the gardens of Kepler-4 to be. Where 2.3 million names stood carved in obsidian, flowers bloomed in colors that had not existed before the humans came. Children played among the memorials, their laughter echoing across the valleys. The dead were not forgotten. They never would be. But life continued. Humanity continued. And the stars, which had been so cold and dark, now felt like home.